Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment to ask you to check me out on Patreon. There are several tiers with great benefits, including ad-free episodes delivered early to patrons. You can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com through Buy Me a Coffee or through e-transfer at crwbaird@gmail.com. Donations help keep the show going. I've also released my first history book, Canada's Main Street, the epic story of the Trans-Canada Highway. You can find it in most bookstores in Canada and through online retailers. You can find the links for Patreon, donating, and my book in my show notes. Okay, let's get to the show. A few months ago, on one of my weekly trips to find the treasures at local thrift stores, I stumbled upon a gold mine. A box set of every episode and TV movie of Columbo. Now, if you're not familiar with the show, it features Peter Falk as the titular character. He seems to be a scatterbrained detective who wears a wrinkled raincoat and drives an old beater car. But it's all a ruse. He does this so suspects underestimate him. Instead, he has a steel-trap logical mind that catches every detail. Perpetrators become flies unaware of his spider web. What sets the show apart is that the viewers know who the killer is from the very beginning. It's all about how Columbo catches the murderer. And while watching one episode recently, I wondered, could Columbo have solved some of the most famous mysteries in Canadian history? I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X. Today we are taking a tour through our history's most tantalizing conundrums, from the death of one of our greatest painters to a double murder that was quickly covered up. These are stories that could even make the great detective scratch his head before saying, just one more thing. Our first case takes us to Algonquin Provincial Park. This slice of heaven was established in 1893, and it's the oldest provincial park in Canada, and it predates most national parks other than Banff, Yoho, and Glacier. Inside its borders are 2,400 lakes, 1,200 kilometers of streams and rivers, and some of the most beautiful landscapes in Ontario. It's easy to see why Tom Thomson loved it so much. He was a quiet man who enjoyed the outdoors and communing with nature. His trips to the park helped inspire some of the most iconic Canadian art. Thomson was 34 years old when he made his first trip to Algonquin in 1912 and sketched his surroundings. One of those drawings became the painting Northern Lake, which now hangs in the Art Gallery of Ontario. He returned to the park the following year to further develop his skills, and on these trips he was often joined by fellow painters like A.Y. Jackson, Arthur Lismer, and Fred Varley. By 1915, he was spending most of his time from spring to autumn in the park. It was his happy place and his muse. His life revolved around it. The park also inspired the Jack Pine, which is considered a masterpiece because it depicts the title tree in an abstract and decorative pattern against a sunset. The sketch was made in the spring of 1916 and the painting was completed the following year. The Jack Pine now hangs in the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. But just as his creativity was reaching its peak, Tom Thomson walked into mystery. In April 1917, Thomson traveled to Algonquin Park, and like in the previous years, he planned to spend the spring, summer, and autumn there. On July 8, 1917, Shannon Fraser, the owner of the Mowat Lodge, saw him walking towards Joe Lake Dam. The small wooden dam is a landmark on canoe routes between Joe Lake and Canoe Lake. It marks a short, mandatory portage for canoers who can swim at the nearby beach before carrying their boats over the rocks to the next lake. Park Ranger Mark Robinson wrote in his diary that day that he spotted Thomson leaving Fraser's Dock at 12:30 p.m. Fraser's Dock, however, isn't a specific location. Instead, it's the name of a lake and the related trail within the park's Leaf Lake system. The park ranger was the last person to see Thomson alive.
Later that afternoon, the painter's upturned canoe was found on Canoe Lake, but Thompson was nowhere to be seen. 8 days later, the artist's body was discovered along the shore of the lake. His watch had stopped at 12:14, and he had a 10-centimeter bruise on his right temple. He was examined by Dr. Goldwyn Howland, and he listed the official cause of death as accidental drowning, but no police investigation was ever conducted. Thompson was buried on the shore of Canoe Lake on July 17th, and 2 days later his brother, George Thompson, had Tom's body exhumed and sent to Owen Sound to be buried in the family plot. Now, the prevailing theory is that Thompson was standing in his canoe when he lost his balance, then fell and hit his head on the edge of the canoe. He fell out while unconscious and went into the water. However, other explanations have emerged in the decades since. Park Ranger Mark Robinson, the last man to see Thompson alive, has implied there was more to the painter's death. He found it improbable that Thompson, who was an experienced outdoorsman and familiar with canoes, would have an accident and subsequently die as described. In 1970, Judge William Little wrote The Tom Thompson Mystery. Little exhumed the original grave at Canoe Lake in 1956 with 3 friends. They discovered a male skeleton with a hole in the skull, suggesting foul play rather than the official account of accidental drowning. A subsequent medical examination revealed that the remains were of a First Nations man, but Little believed they were in fact Thompson's remains. He released a book which quickly became a bestseller and in the process caused renewed interest in Thompson's death. And through the years, claims that Thompson was murdered or he had ended his own life have been put forward with little evidence. But I think a better question is, why are people going around digging up graves? In 1977, Roy McGregor, who grew up near Algonquin Park and is still considered an acclaimed Canadian author and journalist, wrote in the Toronto Star his theory that Thompson was murdered by Mowat Lodge owner Shannon Fraser. Now, Mowat Lodge was a historic establishment located on the northwest corner of Canoe Lake that grew out of an old logging camp. It was a frequent stop for artists like Tom Thompson, who stayed there when not camping. The lodge is now gone, but its former location is still accessible and is often visited by those on paddling expeditions in Algonquin Park. J.S. Shannon Fraser was the postmaster and owner of Mowat Lodge with his wife Annie, that they operated it and prepared meals for guests. Now, the reason they were suspects is that immediately following Thompson's disappearance, Shannon Fraser, and to a lesser extent his wife, went to great lengths in constructing false narratives about what actually happened that afternoon. Annie had been publicly quoted as having had a late breakfast with the painter on the last day he was seen alive, and he was looking bright and chipper. Her words, not mine. McGregor, however, focuses on Winifred Traynor, the woman said to be engaged to Thompson at the time of his death. She kept several of his old sketches worth probably about $20 million today until she died, and the theory became the basis of his 2010 book Northern Light, The Enduring Mystery of Tom Thompson and the Woman Who Loved Him. But motive isn't what fueled these theories. Instead, it was evidence. Maybe. Now, Thompson's legs were apparently bound by wire when his body was found. This claim is based on kind of an exaggeration and misinterpretation over the years because Thompson often wrapped his ankle in fishing wire to relieve his sore joints. But since his death, and despite the facts related to an accidental drowning, theories have only grown. So what do I think? Well, I personally think Thompson accidentally drowned while out on the lake. Even the most experienced outdoor enthusiasts can make mistakes. But one interesting side note is that Thompson is not the only artist the park has claimed. Ken Danby was known for his hyper-realistic painting style. His most famous works include At the Crease, Poncho, and Lacing Up. Now, if you've ever been to the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto, you might have seen a crouching goalie statue at the front doors. That's based on Danby's At the Crease. He also loved Algonquin Park, and in 2007, he was on a canoe trip with friends and family when he suffered a fatal heart attack near North T Lake and became the second painter to meet their maker at Algonquin Provincial Park. The next case on the docket began when F.W.M. Flock met with Ambrose Small on December 2nd, 1919. The meeting was most likely to discuss the profit made from the sale of Small's theater holdings at a profit of $1.7 million, but as soon as the lawyer left Toronto, the new millionaire vanished. Now, Small had no motive to disappear. He did not take his money with him, nor was there any ransom note, let alone evidence of kidnapping left behind. So who was the man at the center of this mystery? Ambrose Small was born on January 11, 1866 in Newmarket, Ontario. At 10 years old, his family moved to Toronto, where his father was the manager of the Grand Hotel. Next door was the Grand Opera House, and it would play a critical role in young Ambrose's future and his disappearance. By the time he was 18, he was tending bar at the hotel when the manager of the Opera House hired him as an usher. And from 1884 onwards, Ambrose was promoted several times until he became the treasurer of the Opera House. But he was also making money on the side by running an illegal bookmaking operation where patrons came to him when they wanted to bet on horses. The more money he made, the greedier Ambrose became, because he wasn't above fixing races in his favor. And with time, he accumulated enough wealth to leave the Grand Opera House behind when he got into a dispute with the manager. And his fortune allowed him entrance to the upper crust of society, and he solidified his spot with the elites when he married socialite Teresa Corman. Teresa's father, Ignace Corman, was a brewer. Both families were Catholic, and they knew each other well. Josephine, who was the sister of Teresa, had married Ambrose's father, Dan Small, after his first wife's death. She was 20 years younger than him. Several years later, Teresa, Dan's sister-in-law, married Ambrose. Now, Teresa stood out. She was known for her philanthropy to Catholic charities and was a pillar of the community and part of the Imperial Order Daughters of the Empire. She was not only Ambrose's wife, but also his partner in business, and she was provided a gracious living with a chauffeur and servants in a mansion on Glen Road in the exclusive Rosedale neighborhood. Ambrose was an excellent businessman, and with the money he made, both legally and illegally, he returned to the Grand Opera House and bought it. And the first order of business was to fire the manager he had quarreled with previously. Then, over the next 20 years, he purchased other theaters across southern Ontario. At the height of his business, he owned 34 theaters, which meant if you wanted to perform in the biggest theaters in Canada, you most likely went through Ambrose Small. Photos of Ambrose showed a duplicitous-looking fellow with a walrus mustache. He was known as a sharp dealer and a jack who was shifty, full of secrets, and voraciously ambitious. His wife enjoyed charity work and supporting the arts. She traveled the world to learn about other cultures and could speak 8 languages. Ambrose was the exact opposite. He easily gave in to his vices and spent his time gambling, drinking, and having affairs. Ambrose even built a secret room off of his office in the Grand Opera House where he could meet with women. And whereas his wife was admired, Ambrose was seen as a ruthless man with no morals. He was not above cheating his friends and business associates if he could find a way to do so. And most people who met Ambrose Small felt a deep dislike for him. So I guess what I'm saying is, a lot of people might have been happy when he disappeared. But despite his faults, his ambitions helped him grow his business to a point that a rival Montreal company wanted to buy him out. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. By 1919, movies were taking over and the theater business was dwindling. And Ambrose knew that it was time to get out. On December 1st, 1919, he sold his chain of theaters for $1.7 million, which is about equal to $28 million today. Someone, either Teresa or Ambrose, deposited that huge check in the Dominion Bank the following morning. And later that day, Ambrose bought Teresa a car, jewelry, and a fur coat. The couple then went for lunch with their lawyer, F.W.M. Flock. Afterwards, Teresa went to the local orphanage where she volunteered her time. Ambrose and Flock returned to the Grand Opera House to finish business. At 5:30 p.m., the lawyer left the office so he could make a 6 p.m. appointment. And for his part, Ambrose vanished. Flock was the last person to see him. And what's even more strange, for the next 2 weeks, nobody reported him missing. And that's because disappearing was not out of the ordinary for him. Ambrose was known to leave with women for weeks at a time, but he always came back. Teresa even said, "I believe my Ambi is in the hands of a designing woman somewhere and will be back." Except, to this day, no one knows what happened to him. Ambrose packed no suitcases and didn't withdraw any more money from the bank or pay by check for any expenses. Police found no evidence of him in any of the usual places, and even his mistress, Clara Smith, knew nothing about where he had gone. Eventually, Teresa admitted that her husband was missing. She offered a reward of $50,000 for any information relating to his whereabouts. And as soon as she did, sightings poured in from Canada, the United States, even Mexico, and all of them were false leads. But the story was becoming a media storm. When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, was in New York City, he was asked to help in the case, but he politely declined. But the question of what happened to the millionaire continued to be a subject of fascination for years. Where's Ambrose became a social phenomenon, a kind of parlor game, and it attracted its share of fraudsters and crackpot theories. People said they heard Ambrose had gone into hiding after cheating the wrong person out of money. Others claimed he had amnesia and he was wandering around North America. The most common theory was that Ambrose had been murdered and his body was dumped in Lake Ontario, and armchair detectives often blamed his wife. They said she had grown tired of his philandering and killed him. Others said she killed him for his fortune because once Ambrose disappeared, she could acquire control of the estate. Ambrose's sisters Florence and Gertrude opposed this by enlisting the services of a man named Patrick Sullivan to help them investigate Teresa's claims. He was unable to find any leads or concrete evidence of wrongdoing, but he did sell stories to newspapers and tabloids claiming everything from assassination by the Catholic Church to a massive police cover-up over the murder. Sullivan and the sisters even produced a written confession by Teresa in the alleged murder of her husband, which a judge threw out. The scandal forced Teresa into a quieter life, but not before she had to deal with questions about Ambrose's assistant of 18 years. John Jack Doughty had been Ambrose's personal secretary and knew most of his secrets. Doughty resented his boss and had been heard making threats against him, so when Ambrose vanished, he became the prime suspect. Evidence of nefarious activity mounted when Doughty took over $100,000 in victory bonds from Ambrose's safety deposit box at the Dominion Bank and fled to Oregon, where he assumed a new identity. A detective named Austin Mitchell went in pursuit and apprehended Doughty, who confessed to the theft, and he was charged with stealing the bonds and plotting to kidnap his boss. But because there was no physical evidence existing, the charges of theft and conspiracy to kidnap his employer were dropped. Doughty was only convicted of stealing the victory bonds and spent several years in the Kingston Penitentiary before returning to Toronto to live out his remaining years. Even though Inspector Edward Hammond with the Ontario Provincial Police was one of the original investigators, he wasn't able to move the case forward. Until his dying day, he believed that Doughty had killed Ambrose Small and Teresa was involved in exchange for money. The Toronto police, however, had no evidence to prove the theory, despite excavating and searching the basement in Ambrose's home, as well as the Grand Opera House. A nearby ravine in Rosedale was scoured to no avail. No matter what, police found no trace of Ambrose Small. However, that doesn't mean there weren't sightings of him across North America, and one of the most unusual happened in 1921. Private Detective John J. Brothy claimed he found Ambrose Small in Des Moines, Iowa, after he was hit by a car and dropped off at the hospital. He said Ambrose had a gunshot wound in his neck, a serious concussion, and both his legs had been severed from the knees down. When asked who he was, he said his name was John Jack Doughty, but Doughty had been imprisoned in Ontario at the time. So when Brothy showed the man a photo of Ambrose Small, he said, "Yes, that is me." Brothy said the mystery man shared similar physical characteristics with Ambrose, but the man in the hospital weighed only 100 pounds. The claim was proven to be false, and in 1923, Ambrose was officially declared dead. Most believe Teresa Small knew more than she ever acknowledged, but she took her secrets to the grave. She died in 1935, and by then her estate had been largely eaten up by back taxes and by its concentration in liquid stocks and real estate. A year later, in June 1936, her possessions were auctioned off. Florence Small, Ambrose's sister, purchased items and later told the press that she had found a letter in one of Teresa's old chests from someone named Reuter, who wrote, Poor Ambrose was killed on December 2nd, 1919, and I know that part of his body, the trunk, was buried in the Rosedale Ravine dump, and other parts of the body were burned in the Grand Opera House furnace. You will be surprised, my dear Florence and Gertrude, to learn that I am more responsible for your brother's death. God forgive me, Reuter. Since the ravine and basement of the Opera House had been extensively searched, it is likely the letter was just another falsification in order to collect the reward money, and the case was officially closed in 1960. The next case takes us to just outside of Digby Neck, Nova Scotia, where George Colin Albright was walking near his family home on September 8, 1963. The 8-year-old was surprised to find a man in his 30s with both legs amputated above the knees laying on the beach. George ran to alert his parents, who transported the man back to their home where they nursed him back to health, and when he was asked his name, he mumbled something that sounded like Jerome. The amputations had been done by a skilled surgeon and both legs had been partially healed by the time he was found. The fact he couldn't talk may have been related to a brain injury suffered when he lost his legs. And Jerome was a mystery. His hands were soft, so many believed he was unlikely to have spent his life doing manual labor. His story spread to newspapers, and people came to see him who spoke French, Latin, Italian, and Spanish, but Jerome didn't seem to understand any of them. And as the years passed, Jerome was taken care of by the community and stayed in the homes of various families. And while some wanted to help, others saw dollar signs and charged people admission to see him. The Nova Scotia government also provided $2 per week to whatever family was housing him. And eventually he was placed in the home of Jean Nicolas, where he remained for about the last decade of his life, never saying who he was or what happened to him. He died on April 15, 1912, but his death was vastly overshadowed by the sinking of the Titanic. So who was he? Was he a sailor who attempted a mutiny and received amputation as punishment? His soft hands don't really seem to match someone who worked on a ship. There were some who believed he was the heir to a fortune and someone had dealt with him to claim the money. The most believable theory may have come from New Brunswick historian Fraser Mooney Jr. In 2008, he published the book titled Jerome, Solving the Mystery of Nova Scotia's Silent Castaway, and in it he claims a young man fell through the river ice in Chipman, New Brunswick in 1859. He developed gangrene in his legs, which were amputated by a local doctor, and when he woke up from the surgery, the man said gamba, Italian for leg, and those around him called him Gamby. Unfortunately for Gamby, the people in Chipman felt he was too much of a burden and had a captain take him to the opposite side of the Bay of Fundy, and the captain left him on a beach and sailed off. Then, quite possibly, an 8-year-old boy named George happened to walk by, and a mystery was born. Our next case takes us to Montreal and the foot of Mount Royal. There you will find the location of what was a mansion on Sherbrooke Street in the Golden Square Mile neighborhood where the richest of the rich called home. That is where the Redpath family lived, and they were very rich. In 1854, John Redpath founded Redpath Sugar. He imported sugar cane and built the first sugar refinery complex in Canada. And within a few years, the company was processing 7,000 tons of raw sugar per year. And that helped the Redpaths become one of the 15 families that lived in the Golden Square Mile, who held an estimated 70% of the wealth in Canada. On the home front, Redpath was busy. He fathered 17 children, and their mansion, which today would be near today's Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, was opulent. It also became the scene of a crime on June 13, 1901. That day, Montreal was shocked to learn that Ada Marie Redpath, 59, and her son, Jocelyn Clifford, 26, had been found dead under suspicious conditions. They were found in a bedroom in a pool of blood. What was even more mysterious was that it seemed the family didn't want answers. In fact, they wanted everybody to just stop talking about it immediately. Within 48 hours, both Redpath and Clifford were buried, and there was no follow-up investigation, and the remaining family members did not discuss the tragedy. Naturally, people started to gossip about what really happened. Now, the prevailing theory was that it was a murder-suicide. Some claimed that it was the mother who murdered the son, others the son who murdered the mother. Decades later, researchers, looking at diaries and letters from family members and servants, developed their own theory of what happened that night. It is believed that Clifford was in a relationship with one of the mansion's maids, and when his mother told him to end the relationship, he flew into a rage. Clifford allegedly went out and purchased a gun. He returned home and rushed up to his mother's room, and as soon as the door closed, 2 shots were fired. When everyone ran to the room to investigate, they found the mother and son dead. Now, if you find 2 people dead in a room where no one else was entered, chances are one of them was the killer. And while the story has grown in prominence over the decades, the home itself fell into disrepair, and in 2014, it was torn down. And for their part, the rest of the Redpath children married into wealthy and influential families and continued to enjoy the wealth their father had accrued, while only some continued to be involved in the family business. Our last case takes us to the shores of Pitt River in British Columbia, where Slumac, a First Nations man, was put to death by hanging in 1891. According to legend, Slumac had shot a man known as Louis B. on the west shore because of a gold deposit worth millions. Now, Slumac was an elderly man who had spent much of his life living around the lake. He knew every mountain, tree, and rock. If there was a gold deposit around the lake, Slumac would have known about it, and some believe he had found a gold deposit that would make anyone rich beyond their wildest dreams. And after shooting Louis B., Slumac evaded the police for months, but as winter approached, he surrendered to authorities. Most believe that Slumac had acted in self-defense, but it was to no avail, and when the noose around his neck extinguished his life on January 6, 1891, a legend was born. And today, Crew Williams, Adam Palmer, and Taylor Starr, the team behind Dead Man's Curse, are on the trail trying to find Slumac's long-lost mother lode. Adam Palmer is a historian and expert, and he says, like most people, he was drawn to the mystery surrounding and tales of lost riches.
This particular legend, there is so many layers. So a legend with a lot of layers, people can choose and pick which one they want to investigate. And I think this is kind of a really special mystery in that sense that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of places, and it's not just one mystery, it's not just one legend. This legend has several within it. And I think that's what intrigues and sparks people's curiosity.
The team is on the 3rd season of the TV show, which premiered in September 2025, and from the beginning, the story has captivated him.
This story is just so close to home, and I think that if you have a lost gold mine in your backyard, why wouldn't you go try to find it? I mean, that's the ultimate question that I've had growing up is, why haven't people been able to find it? You know, if it does exist, there should be evidence.
This season, one of the more interesting storylines is the discovery of a hidden mine that may have played a part in the overall mystery of Slumac's gold.
Well, season 3 kind of takes a turn as actually we find an old mine. So this is turning into something that is taking us down a rabbit hole, a mine that is far older than this 130-year-old legend. So this season, when we discovered this piece of the puzzle, it has taken us to something that's truly incredible and a missing piece of history here in British Columbia.
Like with any other great mystery, the deeper you dig, no pun intended, the more questions you have. From a lost Spanish mine from the 1700s to Slumac's gold, every bit of evidence, like old maps and interviews, is a piece of the overall puzzle. And that is what makes this hidden mine so intriguing for the team.
We have 2 layers of the story, and where we come in is, I've always had this theory that they've been connected somehow. And this year, in this season, we make that connection. But we not only make that connection just through the discovery of this mine, we make it through a discovery of maps, of interviews, of people that we've brought in to help solve this mystery. And they're closing that gap. And we're essentially going through this piece by piece and trying to see if that connection, that hypothesis is true.
The Dead Man's Curse team investigates the story far removed from a soundstage. Instead, they venture into the wilderness, where even experts like Adam say anything can happen. But that makes great television.
There's been moments where, when you're trying to document this, you go on an expedition for, 5 or 6 days, And if you think it's going to run smoothly, you're wrong, because we're going into areas that if you make a mistake, you're not going to come back. So there was a lot of preparation, a lot of, I guess, you need a lot of people with skills that can take care of themselves.
But the story of Slumax Gold isn't just about finding the gold. It's also revealing the history of the First Nations from the lower mainland of British Columbia that stretches back thousands of years. Adam says working alongside Taylor Starr and Don Froese has helped him connect to something greater than the legend.
What they bring to the table is they bring or allow us to talk about the history, talk about their legends, talk about the people that were here, hundreds, thousands of years before us. So there's a lot of interesting history here that people can learn about, not just to do with the lost gold mine, but actually the people, the culture.
In the search for the gold mine, they have also tapped into plenty of other mysteries, including the story of Volcanic Brown, one of the most famous prospectors of his day.
He was basically the celebrity of British Columbia, of the prospecting world. And that's, it brings you back to that other question that you asked is, what draws me into this legend? If I'm being completely honest, it's the search for Volcanic Brown. I mean, that would be incredible to find one of the most historic figures in early British Columbia history, to find him and the mine. That's a doubleheader.
Will any of the mysteries I've explored here be solved? Probably not. But that isn't quite the reason we love these mysteries. Often the real story just isn't as interesting. It's much more fun to speculate and make our own theories. Columbo may have solved every mystery, but that doesn't mean we have to. Sometimes the unknown is just more fun. You can watch Season 3 of Dead Man's Curse in Canada on the History Channel and Stack TV, and listen to 2 seasons of the award-winning podcast Dead Man's Curse ad-free exclusively on Apple's Podcasts by subscribing to Curious Cast Discovery. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories. And there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com, or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.